I still remember standing there holding that ridiculous notice for $30,000 for fishing in my own lake. At first I thought it was a joke, something someone had slipped into my mailbox by mistake. But then I saw the official HOA seal and realized this was real. And standing right behind this mess was Karen, the new HOA president, who looked at my property like she already owned it. I tried to understand how anyone could justify fining a man for fishing on land that had been in his family for generations, but she didn't even blink. She said I was violating HOA regulations and that consequences would follow if I didn't comply. But the way she said it made it clear she wasn't asking. She was declaring war. I just didn't know then that this was only the beginning of something much bigger and worse right now. I grew up around that lake, long before anyone ever mentioned things like HOA rules or fines. It wasn't just water to me. It was memory. It was family. It was the place where everything in my life made sense. My grandfather used to take me there before I could even properly cast a fishing line, showing me patience, silence, and how to wait for something worth catching. Later, my father continued the same tradition, and somehow that lake became the one constant through every stage of my life. Years passed, and nothing changed there. Not the way the water moved, not the way the wind hit the trees. Nothing felt like it could ever be taken away. I lived peacefully, away from conflict, away from people who wanted control over things that didn't belong to them. I never had issues with neighbors, never had disputes, just quiet days and long evenings by the water. The HOA existed somewhere in the background of the community, but it never felt like something that could touch me or that lake at all. But none of that prepared me for what Karen was about to do next in the days that followed, though. That moment started on what looked like an ordinary afternoon, until I noticed someone walking up my driveway as if they owned it. She moved with this strange confidence, like the ground itself was reporting to her. That was my first real encounter with Karen, the newly elected HOA president. She didn't introduce herself politely or ask questions like a normal person would. Instead, she looked straight past me toward the lake and immediately started talking about violations. I remember actually laughing at first because it sounded so absurd. She claimed I had been fishing without proper HOA authorization and that I needed to stop immediately. I asked her what authority she thought she had over private property that had been in my family for decades, but she didn't even hesitate. She said HOA rules applied to the entire community, including the lake, and that I should prepare for consequences if I continued. The way she said it wasn't uncertain or suggestive. It was final, like she had already decided the outcome before even hearing my side. And that's when I realized this wasn't going to be a normal conversation at all, and everything was about to change completely from that point onward. I thought that was the end of it when Karen walked away, but I was wrong in the worst way. The very next morning, my mailbox was already stuffed with a bright orange notice claiming I had violated HOA fishing regulations. I stared at it for a long time because none of it made sense, especially the fine amount, which was so exaggerated it almost felt fictional. I laughed at first and tossed it on the table, thinking someone would eventually realize how ridiculous this was. But then another one came the next day, and then another after that, each one more aggressive than the last. Yellow notices, red stamped warnings, even glossy papers filled with legal-sounding language that clearly didn't belong to any real authority. It felt like Karen had turned my mailbox into some kind of personal campaign against me. At first, I treated it like a joke, even stacking them up just to see how far she would go. But underneath the sarcasm, there was this growing realization that she wasn't stopping. Every notice was meant to wear me down, to make me doubt myself, to pressure me into giving in. And slowly, I started seeing the pattern she was building, and that's when it stopped being funny at all. By the time I walked into the HOA office, I already knew this wasn't going to end with a simple misunderstanding. The building itself felt cold and overly formal, like it was trying too hard to look important. Karen was sitting behind the desk as if she had been waiting for me the entire time. She didn't even bother pretending to be neutral anymore. The moment I placed the stack of violation notices in front of her, she leaned back and smiled, as she had already won. She said the fines had now crossed $30,000, and that I was officially in arrears with the HOA. Then she added, almost casually, that eviction proceedings could begin if I didn't comply. I remember staring at her, trying to figure out how someone could speak like that with so much confidence while being completely wrong. I told her clearly that the lake and the property were inherited and not subject to her rules, but she waved it off like it didn't matter. She insisted the HOA had authority over everything in the community, and that I was the one refusing to cooperate. The more I pushed back, the more certain she became, and that's when I realized neither of us was stepping down from this easily anymore. She showed up later that evening with what she called an HOA enforcement team. 3 men in neon vests and clipboards trying to look official while standing on my driveway. I didn't argue this time. I simply picked up my phone and called law enforcement while they were still talking over each other about violations and compliance. When the police finally arrived, the entire mood shifted instantly, like someone had cut the power to all their confidence at once. I handed over every fake notice, explained the harassment, and showed how they had been pretending to have authority they clearly did not possess. The officer's expression changed immediately as he reviewed everything and realized this wasn't an HOA dispute, but something much more serious. Karen tried to interrupt, raising her voice and insisting she had legal rights. But the moment the officers questioned her documentation, her confidence collapsed. One by one, the so-called enforcement team stopped speaking, realizing they had been dragged into something that could seriously backfire on all of them. Within minutes, the situation flipped completely, and Karen, who had arrived confident and loud, was now standing there with nothing left to say. The officers began taking statements and making it clear that impersonation and harassment charges were now on the table, leaving her stunned and silent for the first time, as everything finally turned against her completely. After that day, everything in the neighborhood changed in a way no one expected. News of what happened spread quickly, and suddenly, Karen wasn't the confident HOA president anymore. She was the subject of every conversation on the street. The authority she tried to build collapsed almost instantly, and the same people who once followed her rules started questioning everything she had ever enforced. The HOA itself went quiet, meetings were canceled, and the pressure that had been building around my property finally disappeared. I went back to the lake a few days later, and for the first time in a long time, it felt peaceful again, like it belonged exactly where it always had been. No notices, no threats, no fake authority standing in the way. Just silence, water, and time moving normally again. And honestly, I still wonder, what would you have done if you were in my place?